Hello and a very warm welcome to Cultural Communication Confidence with me, Victoria Reynoldson. And a very warm welcome to episode 24, where we're talking about the new rules of meetings. Now, I'm picking this theme up as I identified this as one of the hot topics, the key trends in communication and culture for 2023. It's probably no big surprise to you that the nature of meetings has really changed over the last few years. And there is a real blend of different ways that we do meetings now, whether that is virtual, whether we're doing that fully in person, we try and get the team together on certain days, or we're trying to do this in a hybrid way. This is particularly true when we're working with teams across the globe in lots of different countries. So, the way we do meetings has really fundamentally shifted. But there is a danger as more and more of us are working in person at the workplace that actually we shift back to some really our old habits, perhaps is the best way to say it. And perhaps they are, I was going to say bad habits, but perhaps they are bad habits around meetings. In fact, the research really does say how much we really need to shake up what we're doing with our meetings. And there are some unbelievable statistics around this. In fact, the Harvard Business Review talked about that 92% of employees consider meetings costly and unproductive, which is astounding to me. That's a huge number. That's almost 100% of employees saying that. Equally, what's really interesting is that after the pandemic, this research also said that although meetings are now shorter, the actual number of them has increased. So by a whole number of, it was plus 13.5%. So listen, no wonder people are experiencing what is now termed Zoom fatigue or technostress. We're having even more meetings than we were before the pandemic. And, when it comes to this approach, I'm going to be sharing these ideas of what the new rules and meetings should look like. But also just consider this. Even if you have a relatively small meeting with 6 people and you have that meeting for a default of an hour, that's the equivalent of 6 hours. So that really is a lot of time to invest. And I think we have to get quite smart and ask ourselves some really key questions before we plan any meeting in our diary. I think this is a great opportunity for us to be really thinking about what we want the future of our meetings to look like. So let's get into it. So the key questions to ask yourself when planning any meeting. The first thing is what's the purpose? What is the purpose of this meeting? I think we have to get quite clear about what it is we're trying to achieve. And that could be, are we looking to get people together to make a decision? Are we information sharing? Or are we exploring new ideas and creativity? So get clear on what type of meeting we're having and the purpose. And actually within that, define your 3 key meeting objectives. So that can give us quite strong clarity from the beginning and make sure that we're not trying to put too much into the agenda. The next kind of question to really ask yourself is a meeting the best format, bringing everybody together at the same time? There are so many different ways to communicate now, and I think we can get quite creative about this idea of what a meeting looks like and how do we swap ideas. So you can do that at the same time via platforms where you can get together and chat, but also you can do it at different times. So if people have different time zones around the world or they are working different schedules, then you can do that via platforms like Slack and Trello, or even a simple doc where people are contributing and adding their views. So don't assume that you have to have a meeting where everybody joins live at the same time. And again, I'm going to add another statistic here. According to the Harvard Business Review research, employee productivity was 71% higher when meetings were reduced by 40%. So that is an unbelievable statistic. Again, if we challenge ourselves, I'm sure we can all take meetings out of our diary and free up time to be working productively on what it is we need to work on. So moving from this, we then define who needs to be in the meeting. Sometimes it ends up being an invite to everybody, and we have to really challenge ourselves here and say, is that the best use of everybody's time, particularly if there are multiple representatives from the same team? So who needs to know the outcomes versus who needs to actually be there and participating? Really, really consider this question and see if you can really get as few people as possible into that room. Now, this is a bit dependent on your culture. If you are working in a culture which is very collectivist and there is much more focus on getting together to make decisions, to consult with each other before coming to the final view, then maybe it is important to have lots of people in the meeting live. So that is something to really think about. Equally, if you come from a culture that really values relationship building, then it might be important to have some meetings which are really about that connecting and coming together. But again, it comes back to what kind of meeting are we having? What are we trying to achieve here? So from the who, let's talk about what. What do we need from the other people? What action is the outcome from this meeting? If we have at the beginning defined the purpose and the objective, then it should be fairly easy and clear about what it is we're trying to get to as a next step. Having that in mind from the beginning is quite helpful, because what that means is that you can get then super clear about asking for it at the end of the session. Having gone through all of this, now you can get into a bit of the logistics around how you want to design the meeting. Now, I think a lot of companies and organizations have got quite smart over the last few years and realized that a default 60-minute meeting isn't really the best use of time. But again, I think we have to keep asking ourselves the question here, how long do we really need? Could we do this meeting in 45 minutes, 30 minutes, or even in 15 minutes? Could we challenge ourselves here and free up everybody's time? When it comes to designing, equally, we can think about what is going to be the best way to bring the right energy to the room. And I use room in a real kind of loose term, as you'll see in a minute why. So think about the idea of where are you holding this meeting? Go back to the purpose and the objectives and think about, is this a meeting that would benefit from being fully virtual, or does it need to be in person? If it's in person and that's possible, then is that better to have that in a usual meeting room in your workplace? Or are you better going away from the workplace and going to a third space, a different place, which could kind of create different conversations? And that could be quite useful for creative conversations or even difficult conversations. Then think about, how do you want to be in that room? The automatic default is for people to sit down when they're talking, but that isn't necessarily a most positive way to really have the energy in the room. So you could consider different ways. I've heard of meetings where for short meetings, everybody stands and that creates a different energy. I also have heard of meetings where with a small group or maybe just two people, you have a walking meeting. And that's meant to be very, very good for creativity. In fact, it's something that Steve Jobs used to do quite a lot. He used to have his walking meetings. And a 2014 Stanford study found that you're more creative when you walk by up to 60%, which I think is really interesting. And then the final type of meeting, which I think is really also quite fascinating, is a silent meeting. Now, what that looks like is actually you're not talking at all. All you're doing is you are you're creating ideas and contributing in a way which means it's in a written format. So that could be on a doc, on a whiteboard, even on an app like Mural. But the idea of it is that when there are challenges, and these could be culturally driven, where people come from different cultures and they have different levels of comfort with speaking up and expressing an individual opinion, it can be helpful to have a more democratic way of making sure that everybody contributes as their expertise and their knowledge. And that's really important because you do want to create an equal share of voice for all, no matter what people's languages are or what their cultures are. And in fact, there is some interesting insights into this, that when you have a meeting of 6 people, more than 60% of the talking is usually done by 2 people only. So we have to be aware that when we have situations where maybe some voices might dominate that conversation, if we want to hear from everybody, we might need to find a different way. And silent meetings, I think, are a great way of doing that. Now, coming to the end of the meeting, I really do believe strongly that in the new rules of meetings, we should have at least 5 to 10 minutes to do a proper wrap up. And that is really important if we don't want to waste all the time that we spent in that meeting together. So actually, it's quite important to acknowledge where we've got to. It isn't always true that we can get through our fuller objectives. So we have to really check in. Where have we got to? What needs to happen next? What are the next steps? And what is the follow-up? That might be another meeting, but again, do challenge yourself on this. But it might be about how do you get further views by contributing to different platforms. So, really think about that. I also think it's quite important at the end of a meeting to, as well as being functional and talking about next steps and where we got to and what the follow-up is and actions, that we check in. How do people feel? Do they feel like we're going in the right direction? Do we feel as a team in that meeting that we have made progress? I think that's quite a useful kind of check-in at the end of a meeting as well. So these are the rules of meetings, new rules of meetings, I think, which are really relevant for us today. I think it can be incredibly helpful to formalize these by discussing them and agreeing them as a team and thinking about how you want to run your meetings more effectively and productively by planning what needs to happen before meetings, during meetings, and after meetings. And this can be done in a communication charter. Now, I've mentioned the idea of communication charters before, and if you want to learn more about those, why don't you go back to episode 4, I think it was. We'll put a link in the show notes where you can learn more about these communication charters. So as we come to the end of this episode, let me ask you, for you and your team, how do you want to engage in your meetings going forward? How do you make them the most productive they can be and a really great investment of everybody's time to making sure you get strong outcomes? Hopefully you've had some really interesting ideas here today, some ideas that I think will really make the difference to how you think about your meetings, plan your meetings, and get better results. I would absolutely love to know what you think. And actually, if you've got any other ideas around this topic, it's really interesting to hear what you've got to say. So please feel free to reach out to me on LinkedIn. My personal profile is Victoria Reynoldson. And if this is an area that you think is particularly going to be very useful for you and your team, why don't you come and talk to me about the team communication training programs that I do to help people with exactly this idea. I help my clients with how do they get more productive with their meetings. So I can talk to you about the training I do there. And then finally, if you have enjoyed this episode and really valued it and found some inspiration and ideas for you and your team, who else could benefit from it? I would love it if you could share this particular episode with somebody else, somebody in your team or somebody you know in a different company who you think would really benefit from this as well. I'm very passionate about sharing these podcast episodes as widely as possible around the world. So I would love it if you would do that. Thank you so much for joining me today on Cultural Communication Confidence, the podcast, and I look forward to seeing you next time.